the US has the ability to withhold base money from the rest of the world. If that happens, there is nothing the rest of the world can do about it. If they do try to do something about it through some military way or some geopolitical maneuver, I think the volatility of the United States withholding the base money and the rest of the world trying to get it would create volatility on a level that would probably send the dollar to 150.
I personally see easily forecastable hyperinflation, but severe inflation before I see the DXY at 130. But the point for me is I can afford to be more flippant about that because I think gold wins either way, given the volatility that we're going to see in the interim.
The U.S. dollar holds a significant stature as the world's most influential and extensively traded currency. This dominance persists even as the price of gold soars, defying the strength of the U.S. dollar and increasing U.S. Treasury yields, a phenomenon attributed to the market's heightened concerns about global uncertainties. Matthew Piepenburg and renowned analyst Brent Johnson share the perspective that both the U.S. dollar and gold possess supreme status as currencies. They argue against the conventional belief that these assets move inversely based on distinct economic environments, suggesting they can simultaneously appreciate. Brent underscores the pivotal role held by the Federal Reserve in upholding the stability of the U.S. dollar and ensuring adequate liquidity to uphold the recent equilibrium within the system. This strategy has notably contributed to the flourishing of equity and commodity markets, allowing governments to maintain regular functions without disruptions. However, he notes that this approach doesn't eradicate the demand for the dollar. Rather, it might reinforce it, amplifying issues associated with fiat currency and perpetuating the dominant global role of the United States while retaining its influence over other nations. The recent aggressive rate hikes by the U.S. Federal Reserve, reaching 5.25% to 5.50%, the highest since early 2001, signal a substantial shift. Matthew suggests that these hikes might symbolize a potential triggering of consequences, likening it to pulling the pin on a grenade. He speculates that the current Federal Reserve might not fear a recession even under Powell's leadership. Instead, they might strategically engineer decreased demand to slow down the money supply and potentially combat inflation. Although impacting the rest of the world, this approach aligns with instances like Japan's currency devaluation to bolster its bond market amidst rising U.S. rates. We will present Brent Johnson and Matthew Piepenburg clips in an interview with Thoughtful Money. But before we do, if you want more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more updates. Thank you, and enjoy the video.
You know, the global sovereign and debt currency crisis is an abstraction, and that despite all of its faults, which I think, Brent has talked a lot about the faults and the bullying power of the U.S. dollar and the kind of absurdity of our monetary policies. And yet, despite these faults, the U.S. dollar still, with the world reserve currency status, has immense status and immense power to export its inflation, to be that bully in the playground that the rest of the world has to respond to with their own fiscal and monetary policies. I think we both agree that the U.S. dollar and gold are supreme currencies, that they can actually go up together. They're not just inversely priced depending on the environment. That, again, the euro dollar demand, the derivative demand, the petrodollar demand, the U.S. dollar denominated debt, the trillions there, the payment system that the U.S. owns. And I also agree with Brent that even the de-dollarization threat to the U.S. dollar, of which I'm a big proponent of, as Grant Williams and I talked about in 2022, as soon as the sanctions began, that was a watershed moment in 2022, just like 1971 was when Nixon welched on the U.S. dollar as a gold, with the gold backing. The U.S. Fed, the U.S. system, the U.S. policymakers understand the dangers of too strong a dollar, and despite all the distortions they've done to capitalism and all the sins they've done to supply and demand and free price discovery and natural bond yields and natural constructive destruction, even the U.S. can't afford for the dollar to get too strong for a number of reasons. And what they will do is what I think they've always done, whether it was in 2018, 2019, 2020, obviously 2008, is they will create so much immense liquidity to keep the dollar weaker for a number of reasons we can get into, so that even if the U.S. dollar would naturally go up based on this hoover of demand, and in the derivative market, it's like a Roach Motel. The dollars go in, they get tailed up in derivatives, and they don't even come out. So there's all this natural demand pushing the dollar up. I think the Fed will eventually, and right now I think they're just reloading their gun to eventually cut rates and print more money, because every time there is a crisis, they ultimately resort to the fire hose because they can't taper. They can't allow yields to go much higher. They can't win trade deficit, the trade war, which they're losing to China. They can't get out of a recession with too strong a dollar. And my argument is the Fed itself can't endure a long dollar or a strong dollar, and they won't allow it. And I think that's where it might get interesting to see if I'm right or wrong, or even close to, or if Brent agrees or disagrees.
That the dollar going lower is the Fed keeping control. That's the system continuing to exist as it currently does. So if the Fed is able to provide the liquidity that is necessary, and they do provide the liquidity that is necessary, and we don't get a spiking dollar, then we will have a situation exactly like we had over the last 2 or 3 years, where equity markets go up, commodity markets go higher, governments continue to function as they typically have, and the system will perpetuate itself, and the US debt will even get bigger, and the rest of the world will borrow even more in dollars. And that can will get kicked down the road 2 or 3 years, and we'll get right back to where we are now with another debt crisis. And then they'll do it again, and they'll kick. But what that doesn't do, that doesn't get rid of the dollar demand. It increases the dollar demand. It doesn't solve the problem of the evils of fiat currency. It reinforces the problems of the evils of fiat currency. And it does not allow the rest of the world to get out from, quote, under the thumb or under the bully tactics or whatever of the United States. In other words, it perpetuates the US's role in the world. It does not hurt the US's role in the world. And the US still maintains that, I'll use the analogy that Adam just used, that grenade. The US can pull the pin on that grenade anytime they want. And I would argue that at least some of the rate hikes over the last 18 months are pulling the pin. And I would also argue that they are not necessarily as afraid of a recession as perhaps Matt thinks that they are, because I don't think that the US can go into a recession. I do not think that the United States can go into a recession or a serious recession without the rest of the world going into a depression.
The current Fed or FOMC with Powell in charge even is afraid of recession. I think they're actually using recession to engineer decrease demand, to slow down the velocity of money, the supply of money, and maybe to quote unquote fight inflation. I don't even think they're afraid of a recession. I don't think they're afraid of hurting the rest of the world either as they go through this period. Look at what happened to Japan's currency. I think they somewhat allowed a 25% crash in the yen so that Japan could support its bond market because it had to debase its currency to keep up with our rising rates.
Brent underscores the pivotal role of private banks in driving economic function, emphasizing that nearly 90% of the world's money originates from these entities. This highlights the substantial influence they wield in shaping the financial landscape, as their extension of credit is fundamental in propelling economic activity. He contrasts the U.S. domestic dollar market, a debt-based monetary system, with the euro-dollar market, operating predominantly in dollars, but lacking an entity capable of creating base money. This distinction highlights the complexities between domestic and global monetary systems. Brent suggests that the U.S., capable of providing domestic liquidity without extending it internationally, hasn't exercised this option globally. In addition, Matthew introduces the idea that during liquidity crises, the U.S. might selectively control access to base money and liquidity, akin to the strategic use of sanctions. This highlights the potential leverage and strategic maneuvering employed by the U.S. during periods of global financial stress. These perspectives interweave, showcasing the intricate dynamics between private banks' influence, global monetary systems, and the strategic choices made by the U.S. in the global financial landscape. Let's get back to the interview.
We can sit here and talk about the central bank's going to do this, the central bank's going to do that, but I think we both agree that markets are ultimately more powerful than central banks. And what is necessary for the economy to continue to function is you need private banks to extend credit. You need velocity of money. And 90% of the money in the world comes from private banks or commercial banks. That doesn't come from central banks. And once you understand that the United States is the only country that can print, quote unquote, base money, that is a key part of the problem. So what I mean by that is there is a US domestic dollar market, and that is a debt-based monetary system. There's reserves at the Fed and there's currency, physical currency. That's base money. and all the other money that's in the system is loaned into existence. So that's a reserved system. And when you start to get drawdowns or when you get defaults, money disappears. And that's when the Fed has to come in and re-collateralize the system. They have to increase the base money that will then, in a size of which will encourage the commercial banks to start making loans again. Now, that system in the United States is dwarfed by the same system outside the United States. And that system outside the United States also takes place in dollars. That's the euro dollar market. But there is no entity in that euro dollar market who can create base money. The only way the euro dollar market can create more dollars is by extending new loans. And extending new loans means whoever's extending that loan has to put their own capital at risk. And the US has not done so, but the US has the ability to provide liquidity to the domestic market in times of crisis without providing it internationally. Now, they have not done that. They have always they've always provided whatever was necessary for the whole world. But if we were in a war, or if we were in some kind of a geopolitical situation where we were not as cooperative as we have been in the past, the US has the ability to withhold base money from the rest of the world. So if that happens, there is nothing the rest of the world can do about it. And if they do try to do something about it through some military way or some geopolitical maneuver, I think the volatility of the United States withholding the base money and the rest of the world trying to get it would create volatility on a level that would probably send the dollar to 150.
If you take that logic or that thinking, which is fair, and if commercial banks outside of the U.S. or in the European Union, the European Union where I'm sitting in, have a dollar shortage or there's a liquidity crisis there, and they don't have the power to create base money at the ECB or in Brussels, and they certainly don't have it at the Bundesbank or in the local individual banks of each of the countries in the European community. It's my opinion that in those inflection points, the U.S. will be selective in who gets the candy and who doesn't get the candy, who gets the liquidity, who doesn't get the liquidity. You can do the same thing with sanctions on the SWIFT system or access to SDR. Again, that works against countries like Venezuela and Iran. They've done it in the past. It backfired dramatically and historically and irrevocably when they tried that against Russia, which even Obama warned about, Keynes warned about, Robert Triffin warned about. When you weaponize the world reserve currency, you create distrust in it. But I think when there are those inflection points where there's a need for liquidity, because those Eurodollar markets and even those European commercial banks, they take dollars in, they weave them up into derivatives and options and swaps, and they're gone, and they never come back, and they're just levered instruments. And so there's a need for constant straw-sucking dollars there, which I think the U.S. will provide at the expense of the inherent purchasing power of the U.S. dollar, which is so essential grease to this milkshake or ice cream milkshake.
Globally, gold rose over the key $2,000 on Friday, logging its second consecutive weekly gain. Despite the dollar's enduring dominance, the soaring price of gold amid increasing U.S. Treasury yield signals a nuanced market response to global uncertainties. How might the changing relationship between the U.S. dollar and gold reshape the future economic landscape? Share your observations in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.